Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we're going to talk about Voltaire, and we're going to talk about what Dungeons & Dragons is and what it is not. All right, so let's get into this. All right, so I'm going to give you a quote here. It's a cool quote from a cool dude. All right, the quote is, the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Voltaire. All right, now who is Voltaire? Voltaire was a super dope French libertarian who lived from 1694 to 1778, right? And while frankly, I got a little beef with France overall because I don't think they give us a lot of. I don't think they give the United States of America a lot of respect today. I'll never forget what they did with Lafayette. Lafayette came over here and super soldiered for us and made sure we became a country. And frankly, I think it's quite arguable that without Lafayette, we may have not been able to defeat the King of England and become the super dope independent nation we are today. Woo! All right. So Voltaire is a cool dude. And so what did he stand for? He stood for freedom of speech. He stood for freedom of religion. And he stood for separation of church and state. Three things I stand for right now, right? And even though he was French, he was dropping bald eagle, American apple pie, like super dope freedom and liberty back when it wasn't even a thing, right? And so I'm a big fan of Voltaire. Hope you are too. All right, he said something deep, right? He was like, the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman, nor empire, right? He was onto something. I'm going to tell you what he was onto. All right, listen close. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is neither Dungeons, nor Dragons, nor 5th edition. All right? That's what it's not. Let me tell you how it is not those things. Let me tell you what it is. All right? Okay, let's kick it. All right, Dungeons. It is not Dungeons. You know, I run a lot of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I play in a lot of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and I can't for the life of me tell you the last time I was in a dungeon, right? Most of the action now happens in Neverwinter, Waterdeep, Phandalin. We up in the Neverwinter Woods. We up in Mount Houghton now, right? And even Mount Houghton now, that's not technically a dungeon. I guess that is kind of a dungeon when you go in there. But we're not in there that often, right? And we spend a lot more time just traversing above ground and on top of mountains and over mountains and in the skies, right? We really don't do a lot of dungeon stuff anymore, right? So Dungeons & Dragons really, and actually, if you think I'm wrong, look at Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's one dungeon book. One! Waterdeep, Waterdeep, is it the, it's not the Revenge of the Mad Mage. Waterdeep, the Madness of the something or other. It's the sequel to Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I actually own it. I've read a little bit of it so far, and I'm very, very fortunate. I'm getting a lot of books right now at very low cost. I got books that are like drabbling in from buying them on the Black Friday mega deal. I got brand new Dungeons & Dragons books for $21 a piece, and I think I bought like a dozen, right? And so I'm just kind of going through them. I'm in an incredibly blessed space right now. I'm really enjoying it, each and every one of them. Dungeons & Dragons 5e books are just rub them on my face. I love them so much. Each and every one of them, right? And it doesn't, at this point, it doesn't even matter if they're good or bad. Like, to me, I'm so interested in what is Dungeons & Dragons, the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm in on the drama of Dungeons & Dragons, not just. So, like, if it's bad, I get to enjoy the drama. If it's good, I get to enjoy the good, right? Like, so I just love Dungeons & Dragons, right? So, here's the thing. We really don't do dungeons anymore, right? And honestly, the game's no worse for it, right? Like, you're trapped down there. You don't have a lot of resources. Like, we just don't roll like that anymore. Dragons. Boy, oh boy, is the game not dragons, right? Dragons are generally, for a long time, the problem is dragons are wicked dangerous, right? And you're like, oh, well, you can kill the wormlings and you kill the young. You really can't, because when the adults and the ancients find out, they're going to come and they're going to wreck the entire town. Like, they'll burn Neverwinter to the ground if you harmed a wormling or a young, right? Frankly, dragons are super cool, and actually Wizards of the Coast is very aware of this, and TSR was aware of it too. Dragons are half the game, but they almost never show up in play because they're just too wicked dangerous, right? They're like, claw, bite, tail attack, wing buffet, breath weapon, legendary actions. It's just too much, man. Like, it's like dragon slap. That's the whole of it, right? Like, they just too dangerous to really put on the board, right? And by the way, I think there's like 1 million people buying these super huge dragon minis. I'd love to own a dragon mini, but it's going to take a ton of space in my house. It's going to get used like 3 times in my life if I'm lucky, right? Like, until somebody builds an actually good way to make dragons a major part. And Fizzman really didn't fix this. Fizzman was like, oh, here's a few dragon ideas and stuff, but nothing has majorly fixed this, right? One of the things they should have done in Fizzbands is like, here's a sword that gives you, protection from a bunch of dragon stuff, and when you hit with this sword, it cuts the soul tether from a dragon and destroys the dragon and kills it dead, right? Like, make PCs actually dangerous to dragons, right? Like, I don't know, like, because if you haven't reached 15th level, dragons really aren't part of Dungeons & Dragons, okay? That's where I'm going. All right. 5e. Wait, what do I mean? Dungeons & Dragons 5e is not Dungeons & Dragons 5e. What the heck do I mean by that? It's not 5e. Yeah, it's not 5e. Here's why. Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of people are like, oh, Scott, you love Dungeons & Dragons 5e so much. That's technically not correct. I love Dungeons & Dragons now. Dungeons & Dragons now, right? Now, why do I love Dungeons & Dragons now? Because I love Gary Gygax. He is this, like, in America. I love America, okay? America's got 3 champions. Here it goes. George Washington, Harriet Tubman, Gary Gygax, right? In reverse order, right? Gary Gygax is on top of that pile. He's done more for humanity. He's done more for America. He's done so much for America that I think there's going to be an explosion of human improvement that comes from his work, okay? And I see it now. And so I see what he's achieved, and I think it's more than what Harriet Tubman achieved, and I think it's more than what George Washington achieved. And I think Harriet Tubman achieved more than George Washington. And the reason why was she was doing courageous things, and she showed Americans how to be a hero when you don't have every privilege, right? Now, George Washington, right? Like, that dude, he could bench press a truck, and he was just super dope, right? But he came in with a lot of privilege to get all the stuff done that he did. It was impressive to see, and he established America, but he's a little lesser than Harriet Tubman, right? So, Gary Gygax is an American hero, right? So basically, and the reason why I play Dungeons & Dragons now is nothing does more to honor Gary Gygax's legacy and make his memory grow than playing the current version of Dungeons & Dragons, right? If you do that, you will attract young people, which frankly I'm not convinced in any way that another section I'm going to talk about in a minute does not do, right? You will continue to attract charismatic, intelligent, confident people, right? And those people are running the world, right? And anybody who attaches to Dungeons & Dragons, they don't need to see Gary's name immediately. They're going to see his name 5 years after. I'll tell you right now, between 1982 and I would say 1994, right? I started in 1982. I think until 1994, I didn't give 2 rats about Gary Gygax. It was only later when I went back and I realized, oh my gosh, who made this amazing game I'm playing, right? And I started to look at it, that I realized what he actually accomplished, which was unbound identity and unbound immersion. If you don't know what the definitions of that, you'll see the link in the doobly-doo below. And, so Gary's so special, and nothing grows his legacy more than saying, Dungeons & Dragons, today, what it is, right now. The game, right, air quotes, that actually honors every single edition that came before it, and has the courage, the tenacity, and the willingness to not be comfortable to address every single cultural question in real time with its design and with every source book. That's exactly the type of tenacious, mendacious, just really aggressive spirit that Gary had. He was on point, and he grabbed the world and took a bite, man. That dude was epic, right? And Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is the only epic version today. The one that has the best art, the best layout, the best writing, and has the courage to not pretend that the world doesn't exist. It's the only one, all right? So I play Dungeons & Dragons now, and I will play it until I die, right? Like, the only thing that would break that is if there is a complete severing from Gary Gygax. And what would say that to me is, I'm hearing you guys, right? Like, I definitely understand there's a tension at Wizards of the Coast between them embracing everything that Gary Gygax stood for and just some of it, right? And if they ever remove his name from the books, yeah, we're going to have a problem. We'll definitely have a new conversation then, right? But as long as his name is carried forward with literally every single product that comes from Wizards of the Coast, saying, this all came from Gary. Every bit of it. All of it, right? Every single jot and tittle comes from Gary Gygax's legacy. This all honors him, and it's all here because of him. Right? I think Amanda Heyman gets that, and that's she more than anybody there at Wizards of the Coast is carrying Gary Gygax's banner, doing the dope, disruptive stuff he did in 1974, right? And saying, let's raise the gate and open the portal. Let's go through to the next level, right? He did it in 1970. Specifically, he did it in 1978. Although the game came out in 1974, she's doing it in 2021, right? Amanda Heyman carries Gary's banner now, right? So D&D, I don't care about D&D 5e. I care about D&D now. And I will be on D&D 9 when I'm in an old folks home running it, right? Trust and believe. All right. So you have D&D now. You also have D&D then. D&D then is everybody who's running Dungeons & Dragons for what it is. So Dungeons & Dragons is Dungeons & Dragons, it eats the world. It eats the tabletop role-playing game world. Here's how, okay? D&D now, I just defined it. It's the current version. It's what I always play. It's what the dopest, coolest, most engaged people in the world play right now, right? D&D then is a secondary tier, right? And I actually I want D&D then people to come over to D&D now, okay? I would really like to see that, right? That's my wish. That's my Christmas wish, right? So now I also understand you cannot take action to do that on your own because there will be a whip crack, retribution that comes with it. So I'm just saying I would like to see that happen. I used to have a plan for that. That plan has been abandoned because I was told it was not allowed and the threats were too much to endure, right? So there you go. All right. So you have D&D then. D&D then is 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E players, right? They are playing Dungeons & Dragons, right? It's there. It's in the title. It's not the right version. It's not going to help Gary Gygax's legacy, and frankly, it might distract from that. But there's so few of them, right, that I'm not sure it's going to do, because Dungeons & Dragons now, 5E is such a juggernaut, I don't think it's really going to matter that much, right? Then, or most likely it won't. It's not that they're harming the hobby. It's much more that there's a great loss because all these resources are being wasted, in my opinion. All right. Finally, let's talk about D&D Not. Okay? So D&D Not are games that are copies of D&D Then, right? So they're copies of old Dungeons and Dragons, and so these are tabletop role-playing game fantasy games that are specifically copies of the D&D Then versions, 1E, 2E. Nobody really copies 3E and 4E. Well, I guess Pathfinder does, but I guess that is correct. They are copying, so it really, I guess all four really are being copied, right? So the D&D Not is fantasy tabletop role-playing games that are copies of D&D 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E, and they're not Dungeons & Dragons, right? But we can call them D&D Not because they so desperately want to be, right? And because people attach Dungeons & Dragons name to them, even though they are very much not Dungeons & Dragons, right? Like, Dungeons & Dragons is real. It's a thing, right? If you're playing D&D then, you're playing Dungeons & Dragons. If you're playing D&D now, you're playing Dungeons & Dragons. If you're playing, these other games that are fantasy tabletop role-playing games that are copies of D&D 1E, 2E, 3E, and 4E, you're playing D&D not, right? The games are not D&D, but you might as well put D&D at the front because they all wish they were. They all desperately wish they were D&D, right? But they're not, and they're never going to overtake Dungeons and Dragons unless they make some serious changes, which I don't see anyone in that community being willing. There's no innovators in that space. They're all literally copiers, right? They're never going to surge past Dungeons and Dragons. No copiers are going to, surpass an actual innovator, right? Innovators like Gary Gygax and Amanda Heyman. There's nothing in the D&D not space that's ever going to surpass anything Amanda Heyman ever writes. Never, right? So all that's my opinion. So that's what D&D is, right? That's what D&D is not. What D&D really is today. Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeons and Dragons 5e is incredible locations like floating cities and swamps that have crystal that have flowing crystal, and Neverwinter and Faerun and Neverwinter and Waterdeep and Phandalin. Those not dungeons. That's Dungeons and Dragons now, right? The dragons, right? They are the dragons of Strixhaven. The dragons who can take their ancient form and literally tear you apart, or give you a tip for making sure that your next exam goes smoothly. And finally, the 5e is really now. That's what it is. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.